What would you do if someone tried to erase you, froze your money, took your friends, laughed while their lawyers destroyed you in court? Catherine Whitmore did something most people couldn't. She waited. For 8 months. And then she struck. This is the story of Derek Whitmore, a man who wore confidence like a tailored suit, expensive, perfectly fitted, and designed to be seen. At 43, he had built an empire in commercial real estate that stretched across 3 states, a portfolio worth north of $200 million, and a reputation for ruthlessness that made competitors tremble during negotiations. This morning, as he adjusted his platinum cufflinks in the polished marble hallway of the Superior Court of Manhattan, he wore that same confidence to what he believed would be the final humiliation of Catherine Whitmore, the woman who had been his wife for 18 years. He thought silence meant weakness. Today, he'd learn it meant strategy. Subscribe to this channel. Comment where you are watching from. Sit back and relax as we proceed to the story. "This will be over by lunch," Derek said to his attorney, Richard Voss, a silver-haired shark from one of the city's most prestigious firms. "We've bled her dry over the past 8 months. She can't afford another continuance. I doubt she can afford lunch after today." Richard adjusted his briefcase, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Whitmore, I must remind you that until the judge signs off—" "She'll sign," Derek interrupted, his voice sharp with certainty. "Catherine has no money, no counsel worth anything, and no fight left in her. I made sure of that. Every asset frozen. Every credit line closed. Every mutual acquaintance reminded of where their loyalties should lie. She's been living in her sister's basement for 6 months, Richard. This isn't a divorce proceeding. It's a surrender." Through the courtroom doors, visible through the narrow window, Catherine sat alone at the respondent's table. Even from a distance, she appeared diminished. A woman who had once hosted charity galas for 300 guests now wore a simple grey dress that had seen better seasons. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a modest bun. No jewelry adorned her fingers or neck. She stared down at a single manila folder before her, hands folded, utterly still. Derek allowed himself a smile. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Andrea Stanton." Judge Stanton entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who had presided over family court for 22 years and had long ago developed immunity to theatrics. She was a woman in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, known for suffering neither fools nor bullies. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here for the final hearing in the matter of Whitmore vs. Whitmore, case number D-2024-7531. Counselors, are both parties ready to proceed?" Richard Voss stood smoothly. "The petitioner is ready, Your Honor. Mr. Derek Whitmore is present and represented." All eyes turned to the respondent's table. Catherine Whitmore rose slowly to her feet. She stood alone. No attorney beside her. No legal team arrayed with briefcases and documents. Just one woman in a grey dress with a single folder. "I am ready, Your Honor," Catherine said quietly. Her voice carried across the courtroom, not loud but clear, steady. Judge Stanton frowned. "Mrs. Whitmore, you appear to be without counsel. This court has granted you multiple continuances over the past 8 months to secure representation. I must ask, do you understand the complexity of the financial matters before this court? The valuation of business entities, the division of marital assets, "I understand completely, Your Honor," Catherine replied. I am choosing to represent myself at this time." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters, court watchers, a few of Derek's business associates who had come to witness his victory. Derek himself leaned back in his chair, barely suppressing a smirk. This was even better than he'd anticipated. Catherine, representing herself, was like a lamb walking into an abattoir and asking politely where to lie down. Judge Stanton's frown deepened. "Mrs. Whitmore, while you have that right, I strongly advise against it in a case of this magnitude. The petitioner is seeking a division of assets worth—" She glanced at her documents. Approximately $218 million, with complex holdings in limited liability companies, real estate trusts, and offshore accounts. Without legal counsel, you place yourself at severe disadvantage. "I appreciate the court's concern," Catherine said, "but I am prepared to proceed." The judge studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well. Mr. Voss, you may present the petitioner's case." Richard Voss stood, and for the next 40 minutes, he methodically dismantled Catherine Whitmore's life. He presented documents, mountains of them, detailing the Whitmore financial empire. He explained, in language designed to sound both technical and condescending, how Derek Whitmore had built his fortune through singular genius and tireless effort, often working 80-hour weeks while Catherine managed the household. He emphasized that while New York was an equitable distribution state, equity did not mean equality, and that Mrs. Whitmore's contributions to the marriage had been minimal at best. Mrs. Whitmore did not work outside the home, Voss explained to the court, pacing before the bench like a professor, before particularly slow students. She did not contribute to the business ventures that generated this wealth. She did not take financial risks or make strategic decisions. She attended social functions, yes, and managed domestic staff. But these activities, while pleasant, do not constitute grounds for a 50% division of assets that were created entirely through Mr. Whitmore's acumen. He presented the petitioner's proposed settlement. Catherine would receive the house in Connecticut, a modest 4-bedroom property worth approximately $1 million, a one-time payment of $500,000, and no ongoing alimony, given that she was a healthy woman of 41, perfectly capable of employment. The total offer represented less than 1% of the marital estate. "And, Your Honor," Voss continued, building toward his conclusion, "I must address the allegations Mrs. Whitmore has made in her counterclaim. Allegations of hidden assets, fraudulent transfers, and offshore accounts established to avoid equitable distribution. These allegations are not merely unfounded, they are defamatory. My client has provided complete financial disclosure. Every LLC, every property holding, every investment account has been documented and submitted to this court. Mrs. Whitmore's accusations are the desperate fabrications of a woman who refuses to accept that her comfortable life, a life she contributed nothing to building, is coming to an end." Derek watched Catherine throughout this presentation. She sat motionless, her face expressionless, hands still folded on the table before her. She did not take notes. She did not object. She simply sat, absorbing Richard's words like a stone absorbing rain. She looked defeated. She looked broken. Derek had never felt more powerful in his life. When Voss finally sat down, Judge Stanton turned to Catherine. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have an opportunity to respond to the petitioner's case and to present your own evidence. Do you wish to proceed?" Catherine stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then please do so." Catherine opened her manila folder, the only document she appeared to possess. She removed a single sheet of paper and approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I would like to request a brief recess before I present my case." Judge Stanton's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've only just begun. On what grounds do you request a recess?" "I am expecting someone, Your Honor. Someone who will be assisting me. I was told they would arrive this morning. But traffic in Manhattan can be unpredictable." Derek actually laughed, a sharp bark of amusement that echoed through the courtroom. He couldn't help himself. The absurdity of it was too much. Catherine had no one, no allies, no resources, no help coming. This was a stalling tactic, so pathetic it bordered on. The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. The woman who entered was in her late 50s, tall and striking, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the judge's monthly salary. She moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had walked into 1,000 courtrooms and dominated every single one. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp bob, and her eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room with the clinical precision of a surgeon examining a patient before making the first incision. Behind her, 2 younger attorneys wheeled in 4 large cases on carts, then 2 more, then 2 more. Within seconds, the back of the courtroom was filled with legal materials. Richard Voss had gone pale. Derek felt something cold touch the base of his spine. Not quite fear. Not yet, but the first whisper of uncertainty. Judge Stanton leaned forward, recognition dawning on her face. "Ms. Keating?" The woman smiled, a small, professional expression that contained absolutely no warmth. "Good morning, Your Honor. Forgive my tardiness. I'm Victoria Keating, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, I represent Mrs. Catherine Whitmore in this matter." The courtroom erupted. Victoria Keating. The name alone was enough to change the atmospheric pressure in the room. For those unfamiliar with the rarefied world of elite litigation, the reporters in the gallery were already typing frantically on their phones, pulling up information, their faces growing progressively more shocked as they read. Victoria Keating was not simply an attorney. She was an institution. Senior partner at Blackwell and Keating, a firm she had co-founded 30 years ago that represented Fortune 100 companies, foreign governments, and the kind of clients who appeared on the covers of financial magazines. She had argued before the Supreme Court, twice. She had taken down corporate empires, exposed frauds that made international headlines, and dismantled legal strategies that other attorneys had believed impregnable. Her hourly rate was rumored to be $4,000. Some said higher. She did not take divorce cases. Ever. And yet here she stood. Derek turned to Richard Voss, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "What is this? How did she... Catherine doesn't have money for... This is some kind of stunt. It has to be... Mr. Whitmore." Judge Stanton's voice cut through his panic. "Please contain yourself. Miss Keating, the court recognizes your appearance. I must say, this is somewhat unusual. I was under the impression from our previous hearings that Mrs. Whitmore was unable to secure counsel." Victoria Keating moved to the respondents' table, placing one hand briefly on Catherine's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was not lost on anyone present. "Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore was indeed unable to secure counsel, primarily because her husband executed a systematic campaign to financially strangle her, deny her access to marital funds for legal representation, and leverage his business connections to ensure that most local attorneys would decline to represent her out of fear of professional retaliation." "Your Honor, I object to this characterization," Richard began. "I'm not finished, Mr. Voss." Victoria's voice was not loud, but it had the effect of a thunderclap. Richard Voss, a man who billed $700 an hour and had made equity partners weep, actually stopped talking mid-sentence. Victoria continued, her eyes never leaving the judge. However, Mrs. Whitmore is not without resources. She is not without allies. And as of this morning, she is not without the best legal representation money can buy. Representation that she is not, incidentally, paying for. My firm has taken this case pro bono, Your Honor, because what has been done to this woman represents such a grotesque mistreatment of legal process and marital power that we consider it our ethical obligation to correct. Derek felt his stomach drop. Pro bono. Victoria Keating didn't work for free. Nobody at her level worked for free, which meant someone else was paying, someone with enough money to command the attention of Blackwell and Keating, someone powerful enough to convince Victoria Keating to walk into a family court for a divorce case. But who? Catherine had no one. Her parents were deceased. Her sister was a school teacher in New Jersey. Her few friends had all abandoned her when Derek made it clear that association with Catherine meant exile from their social circle. Judge Stanton was studying the documents Victoria had handed her. These appear to be properly filed notices of appearance. The court accepts your representation of Mrs. Whitmore. However, Miss Keating, we are scheduled for final hearing today. The petitioner has presented his case. Are you prepared to proceed, or will you be requesting a continuance to familiarize yourself with the matter? Victoria Keating smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Your Honor, I have been familiarizing myself with this matter for approximately 6 months. I am fully prepared to proceed. In fact, I would very much like to proceed. Right now. She turned, and one of her associates immediately handed her a bound document approximately 3 inches thick. Your Honor, I am submitting the respondent's formal opposition to the petitioner's proposed division of assets, along with supporting documentation. I apologize for the volume. We've tried to be thorough. The court clerk accepted the document, his arms actually sagging under the weight. Judge Stanton gestured to Victoria. You may proceed, Ms. Keating. Victoria Keating returned to the respondent's table and conferred briefly with Catherine, her voice too low to carry. Catherine nodded once, her face still composed, still calm. Then Victoria turned to face the courtroom, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and cold as winter. Your Honor, the petitioner's attorney has spent the last 40 minutes explaining to this court that Catherine Whitmore contributed nothing to her marriage, that she was merely decorative, a passenger in her own life, that she deserves scraps from a table she never helped set. She paused, letting the words hang. This characterization is not only cruel, it is a lie. But we will address that lie. What we will address first, however, are the lies Mr. Derek Whitmore has told this court under penalty of perjury regarding his assets, his income, and his conduct during this marriage. Derek felt Richard Voss tense beside him. Mr. Voss has assured this court that complete financial disclosure has been provided, Victoria continued. He has stated that every LLC, every property, every account has been documented. He has characterized my client's allegations of hidden assets as defamatory fabrications. She walked to her table and picked up a single document. This, Your Honor, is an account statement from Bancroft Financial Services in the Cayman Islands. It shows an account opened in 2019 under the name of a shell corporation called Meridian Holdings, LLC. The beneficial owner of Meridian Holdings is Derek Whitmore. The current balance is $43 million. The courtroom went silent. This account, Victoria said, her voice never rising, never hurrying, does not appear anywhere in the financial disclosures Mr. Whitmore submitted to this court. Not in his personal financial statements, not in his business holdings. Nowhere. Richard Voss was on his feet. Your Honor, we have no opportunity to authenticate this document, no way to verify. This could be completely fabricated. Victoria handed a copy to the clerk. Your Honor, I have here authenticated statements, certified by Bancroft Financial Services, complete with account numbers, transaction histories, and wire transfer records. I also have a sworn affidavit from a forensic accountant employed by my firm who has traced the source of the funds deposited into this account. They came from 4 different LLCs owned by Mr. Whitmore, transferred in increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting requirements to the IRS. She paused, letting that sink in. In other words, Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore has not only hidden marital assets from this court, he has also likely committed tax fraud on a substantial scale. Derek felt the room tilting. This was impossible. The Cayman account was buried under 6 layers of corporate structure. He'd paid specialists $250,000 to ensure it was untraceable. No one knew about it, except his accountant and his offshore banker, both of whom had signed ironclad NDAs. How did she? But that's just one account, Victoria continued, as casually as if discussing the weather. Let's talk about the others. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria Keating systematically dismantled Derek Whitmore's financial life. She presented evidence of 7 additional offshore accounts, totaling over $94 million in hidden assets. She documented shell corporations in Delaware, Nevada, and the British Virgin Islands. She showed wire transfers made days before Derek filed for divorce, moving money from joint accounts into entities Catherine had never heard of. She presented emails Derek thought had been permanently deleted, in which he instructed his accountant to make sure Catherine can't touch any of this. With each revelation, Richard Voss objected, his voice growing more strained. And with each objection, Victoria calmly presented authentication documents, bank records, corporate filings, and sworn affidavits that rendered his protests meaningless. Judge Stanton's expression had transformed from professional neutrality to barely concealed fury. Mr. Voss, she said, after the 7th undisclosed account had been revealed, does your client wish to address these allegations? Because from where I'm sitting, it appears he has submitted fraudulent financial disclosures to this court. Derek leaned toward Richard, his whisper urgent. How does she have this? How is this possible? Richard's face had gone from pale to grey. I don't know. The only way she could have accessed these accounts is if someone with inside knowledge— Your Honor, Victoria said, if I may address the court's question. Mr. Tobro, Whitmore is wondering how we obtained this information. The answer is simple. We had help. She turned to the gallery. I'd like to call my first witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. James Whitmore to the stand. The courtroom doors opened for the second time that morning, and Derek Whitmore's world truly began to collapse. James Whitmore was 71 years old, a man who had built Whitmore Properties from a single apartment building in Queens into a regional powerhouse before handing the reins to his only son 15 years ago. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a construction accident in his 30s, but his posture was still straight, his gaze still sharp. He did not look at his son as he walked to the witness stand. Derek felt something break open in his chest, a combination of shock, betrayal, and a fury so profound it threatened to choke him. "Dad," he said aloud, his voice cracking, Dad, what are you— Mr. Whitmore, please, Judge Stanton said sharply. You will have an opportunity to speak through your counsel. Right now, you will remain silent. The bailiff swore James in, and he settled into the witness chair with the careful movements of a man whose body had earned its aches. Victoria approached him with something that almost resembled gentleness. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for being here. I know this is difficult. Can you please state your relationship to the parties in this case? I'm Derek's father, James said. His voice was rough, gravelled by 7 decades of cigarettes he'd finally quit 10 years too late. And Catherine's father-in-law. Was her father-in-law. I suppose I still am, technically, until this divorce is final. Mr. Whitmore, how long have you known Catherine? 20 years. She and Derek met when she was working as a volunteer coordinator for a literacy non-profit. Derek was there for some corporate charity event. Good publicity, tax write-off, you know how it is. But he actually fell for her. Really fell. I'd never seen him like that. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. And what was your impression of Catherine during those early years? James's expression softened slightly. She was the best thing that ever happened to my son. Smart, kind, genuinely good. Came from nothing. Her father was a mechanic, mother was a nurse. But she had more class in her pinky finger than most of the society women Derek had dated. She loved him, really loved him. You could see it. And did that change? Her feelings didn't change, James said. His did. Victoria paused, letting the words resonate. Can you elaborate? After they married, after my grandson Thomas was born, Derek started to change. The business was growing fast, maybe too fast. He was making more money than I ever dreamed of. But it was never enough. He started traveling more, working longer hours. He started— James stopped, his jaw working. He started treating Catherine like she was a staff, like she was just another employee in his life. Did you ever discuss this with your son? I tried. I tried everything. I told him he was making the same mistakes I'd made. I lost Derek's mother to a heart attack when he was 12 because I was always working, always building, never home. I told him money wasn't worth losing your family. He told me I didn't understand modern business, that Catherine was fine, that she had everything she needed. Victoria's voice remained gentle but insistent. Mr. Whitmore, did there come a time when you became aware that your son was planning to divorce Catherine? Yes. About a year ago, he came to me and said he was done with the marriage, said Catherine was boring, that she didn't understand him anymore, that he needed someone more, compatible with his lifestyle. James's lip curled with disgust. He meant younger, prettier, more impressed by his money. Did he discuss his financial strategy for the divorce? He did. James looked directly at his son for the first time, and Derek flinched at the disappointment in those eyes. He told me he was going to make sure Catherine got as little as possible. He said she'd been a burden, not a partner. He said he was moving money where she couldn't find it, where the courts couldn't touch it. He was proud of how clever he was being. Richard Voss rose. Your Honor, I object. This is hearsay, and it's overruled, Judge Stanton said flatly. This is family court, Mr. Voss, and I have broad discretion regarding evidence. I want to hear what Mr. Whitmore has to say. Continue, Ms. Keating. Victoria nodded. Mr. Whitmore, you mentioned that your son was moving money where the courts couldn't touch it. Did he provide you with specific details? Some. He told me about the Cayman accounts, about the shell companies. He asked me to help him set up some additional structures using my old business contacts. I refused. And what was his reaction? James's voice hardened. He told me that if I didn't help him, he'd cut me off from seeing my grandson, Thomas. The boy's only 12. Derek knew that would hurt me. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even Richard Voss looked uncomfortable. "Did you comply with his demands?" Victoria asked. I pretended to. I told him I'd help, and then I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every account number he mentioned, every instruction he gave. I kept records for 8 months. "And why did you do that, Mr. Whitmore?" James looked at Catherine for the first time since entering the courtroom. His eyes were damp. "Because that woman raised my grandson while my son was off building his empire. She took care of my late wife during her final illness. Cancer, pancreatic. They gave her 3 months. And she lasted 18, and Catherine was there every single day. When I had my heart attack 4 years ago, Catherine was the one who visited me in the hospital every morning for 2 weeks. Derek came twice. Twice." His voice broke slightly. "She is a good woman, a better person than my son has become. And I'll be darned if I stand by while he destroys her out of spite." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Victoria walked to her table and retrieved a thick binder. "Your Honor, I'm entering into evidence Mr. James Whitmore's documentation, which includes recordings of conversations with his son, New York being a one-party consent state for recording, as well as emails, text messages, and financial documents that Derek Whitmore provided to his father, believing he was a co-conspirator in asset concealment." She handed the binder to the clerk. "These documents, Your Honor, demonstrate a clear and premeditated plan to defraud both this court and Mrs. Whitmore. They show systematic perjury in Mr. Derek Whitmore's financial disclosures. They show contempt for the legal process and a belief that he could simply lie his way to victory." Judge Stanton accepted the binder, her expression carved from stone. "Mr. Voss, does your client have a response to these allegations?" Richard Voss looked like a man watching his career crumble in real time. "Your Honor, we need time to review these materials, to verify their authenticity, These materials are authenticated, Your Honor," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "We have digital forensics reports, chain of custody documentation, and Mr. James Whitmore's sworn testimony. Mr. Voss is welcome to review them during a recess, but their validity is not in question." Derek finally found his voice. "This is insane," he shouted, lurching to his feet. "You can't. Dad, how could you do this? After everything I've done for you, for the family business, Sit down, Mr. Whitmore." Judge Stanton's voice cracked like a whip. "You will sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom, and we will proceed without you. Do you understand?" Derek sat, trembling with rage and something else, something that felt horribly like fear. Victoria wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we have 2 more witnesses we'd like to call. First, Dr. Melissa Chen, a forensic psychologist who has evaluated the impact of Mr. Whitmore's conduct on both Mrs. Whitmore and their son Thomas. Second, we have young Mr. Whitmore himself, who has some things he'd like to say to this court about his father's behavior." Derek's head snapped up. No, you can't bring Thomas into this. He's a child, he's 12 years old, Your Honor," Victoria said calmly. Old enough to have a voice in matters that affect his welfare. Old enough to understand what he's witnessed, and old enough, under New York law, to express a preference regarding custody arrangements. Custody isn't even on the table, Derek nearly screamed. I have full custody. She didn't fight for custody, Mr. Whitmore, because you threatened to bankrupt her and drag her through years of litigation if she tried, Victoria said, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. You told her that you'd use your money and influence to paint her as an unfit mother. You told her that she'd never see Thomas again if she didn't surrender custody without contest. She pulled out another document. This is a recording of that conversation, Mr. Whitmore. Would you like me to play it for the court? The color drained from Derek's face. Richard Voss stood, his voice strained. Your Honor, I need to consult with my client. I need to... What you need, Mr. Voss, is to seriously consider whether you want to continue representing a man who has lied to you, lied to this court, and apparently committed multiple felonies in the process of trying to destroy his wife. Judge Stanton's voice was ice. But yes, we'll take a recess. 30 minutes. When we return, Miss Keating, I want to hear from your remaining witnesses. And then I want to hear a very good explanation from Mr. Whitmore about why he should not be held in contempt of court, face perjury charges, and potentially criminal prosecution for fraud. She stood. All rise. The recess felt like an eternity and an instant simultaneously. Derek spent it in a conference room down the hall, pacing like a caged animal, while Richard Voss sat with his head in his hands. This is salvageable, Derek kept saying. We can explain the accounts. We can say I was just protecting assets from business liabilities. We can... Stop talking. Richard's voice was dead. Derek, just stop. Your father has recordings. He has documents. He has a paper trail that proves you deliberately concealed assets and committed perjury. There is no explaining that away. There is no clever legal strategy that fixes this. Then what do I do? Richard looked up, and his eyes were empty. You accept that you've lost. You cooperate fully. You disclose everything. And you pray that the judge doesn't refer this to the criminal division. And Derek? What? Find new counsel. I'm withdrawing from this case effective immediately. I will not be party to fraud, and I will not sacrifice my license for your arrogance. He stood, gathered his briefcase, and walked out. Derek stood alone in the conference room, his reflection staring back at him from the polished table surface. For the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely afraid. When they returned to the courtroom, Richard Voss was absent. In his place sat a young attorney named Susan Mitchell, a public defender who Judge Stanton had appointed to ensure Derek had representation, if only for the purposes of protecting his constitutional rights. Susan had spoken to Derek for exactly 3 minutes before the hearing resumed. Her advice had been simple. Say nothing unless I tell you to speak. Agree to everything Miss Keating requests, and prepare yourself for the worst day of your life. Dr. Melissa Chen took the stand first. She was a woman in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and the calm demeanor of someone who had testified in court hundreds of times. Her credentials were impeccable: PhD in clinical psychology from Yale, specialization in family trauma, published author, expert witness. Victoria walked her through her evaluation of Catherine and Thomas Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore presented with classic symptoms of economic mistreatment, Dr. Chen explained. This is a form of domestic harm in which one partner uses financial control to trap and manipulate the other. In Mrs. Whitmore's case, her husband systematically cut off her access to money, closed her credit cards, denied her access to bank accounts, and ensured she was completely financially dependent. This created a state of learned helplessness and severe anxiety. Did you observe any physical effects of this mistreatment? Yes. Mrs. Whitmore has lost approximately 20 pounds over the past 8 months due to stress. She shows signs of chronic insomnia. Her cortisol levels, stress hormones, were significantly elevated. She was, when I first evaluated her 6 months ago, in a state of psychological crisis. And her son, Thomas? Dr. Chen's expression tightened. Thomas is a deeply troubled child. He has witnessed his father's cruelty toward his mother. He has been used as a weapon, his father threatening to deny Catherine access to him if she didn't comply with demands. Thomas has developed anxiety, depression, and significant behavioral problems at school. His grades have dropped. He's become socially withdrawn. In your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, what is in Thomas's best interest regarding custody? Thomas needs stability, safety, and a parent who puts his emotional welfare above their own interests. Mrs. Whitmore has consistently demonstrated that she is that parent. Mr. Whitmore has demonstrated the opposite. He has used his son as a bargaining chip and a tool for punishment. Victoria nodded. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Your Honor, I'd like to call Thomas Whitmore to the stand. Derek half rose from his chair. Your Honor, please, he's just a boy. He doesn't need to be dragged into— Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, Judge Stanton said quietly. You lost the right to protect your son from this situation when you created it. If Thomas has something to say, I'm going to hear it. The courtroom doors opened, and Catherine's sister, Jennifer, entered with a boy who looked younger than his 12 years. Thomas was small for his age, thin, with dark hair, and his mother's gentle eyes. He wore a button-down shirt that looked slightly too large, and his hands were shaking. Catherine made a small sound, a choked sob she immediately suppressed, when she saw him. Thomas walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down, his feet barely touching the floor. Victoria approached him carefully, her entire demeanor shifting. With the adults, she had been a predator. With this child, she became almost maternal. Hello, Thomas. My name is Victoria. I know this is scary, being in a courtroom. Are you okay? Thomas nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, Mum. Thomas, I'm going to ask you some questions. You can take your time answering. If you need a break, just tell me. Okay? Another nod. Thomas, can you tell me about your mum? For the first time since entering the courtroom, the boy's expression softened. She's really nice. She makes the best chocolate chip cookies. She helps me with my homework every night, even though I'm not very good at math. She reads to me before bed, even though I'm probably too old for that now. His voice cracked slightly. She always knows when I'm sad, even when I don't tell her. Do you love your mum, Thomas? So much. The words came out as a whisper. Thomas, do you understand why your mum and Dad are getting divorced? Dad doesn't love her anymore. He said she was boring. He said he needed to move on. How did that make you feel? Thomas's hands clenched in his lap. Mad. Mum's not boring. She's the best person I know. Dad he's never home. He doesn't come to my soccer games. He doesn't help with homework. He just works and talks on the phone and gets mad when things are messy. Victoria paused, letting the courtroom absorb the child's words. Thomas, did your dad ever talk to you about the divorce? About what was going to happen? He said I was going to live with him. That Mum would get to visit sometimes, maybe on weekends. He said Mum couldn't take care of me anymore because she didn't have any money. How did you feel about that arrangement? The boy's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to live with Dad. He's mean to Mum. He makes her cry. And he's mean to me, too, when I don't do exactly what he wants. He yells a lot. He says I'm disappointing him." Victoria's voice remained gentle. "Thomas, has your dad ever told you not to talk to your mum about certain things?" "Yes. He said if I told Mum about his new girlfriend, he would take away my phone and my computer. He said Mum would be really hurt, and it would be my fault." A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. "Your dad has a girlfriend?" "Her name is Amber. She's 26. She works at Dad's company. I heard him on the phone with her. He told her that after the divorce was done, she could move in with us." Thomas's voice broke. "I don't want her to move in. I want my mom." Derek had gone completely white. "Thomas," Victoria said softly, "if you could tell the judge what you want, what would you say?" The boy turned to Judge Stanton, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I want to live with my mum. Please. I know she doesn't have a lot of money right now, but she loves me. She really loves me. Dad just wants to win. He doesn't actually want me. He just doesn't want Mum to have me." Judge Stanton's expression was carved from granite, but her eyes were bright with emotion. "Thank you, Thomas. You're very brave. You can step down now." Catherine's sister came forward and guided the boy out of the courtroom. As he passed his mother's table, he broke free and ran to Catherine, throwing his arms around her. She held him, her face buried in his hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I love you, Mom," Thomas whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too, baby," Catherine managed. "Everything's going to be okay, I promise." When Thomas had left, Judge Stanton turned to Derek with an expression of such profound disgust that he actually recoiled. "Mr. Whitmore, in 22 years on this bench, I have seen the absolute worst of human behavior. I have seen parents who mistreat their children, spouses who harm each other, people who lie and cheat and steal without conscience. But what you have done, the systematic, calculated cruelty with which you have destroyed your wife and manipulated your son, is among the most reprehensible things I have ever witnessed." Her voice was shaking with controlled fury. "You lied to this court under oath. You concealed assets. You weaponized your own child. You used your wealth and power not to build, not to create, but to inflict pain on a woman whose only mistake was loving you and giving you the best years of her life." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Ms. Keating," Judge Stanton said, turning away from him as if he were too contemptible to look at. "I assume you have a proposed division of assets?" "I do, Your Honor." Victoria stood, and there was something almost like satisfaction in her voice. "Given Mr. Whitmore's fraud, his perjury, and his misconduct, we are requesting the following. First, full custody of Thomas to Mrs. Whitmore, with supervised visitation only for Mr. Whitmore, pending completion of a parenting evaluation and anger management therapy." Derek made a strangled sound. "Second, we request a 75% division of all marital assets to Mrs. Whitmore, including all hidden accounts now revealed, as well as punitive damages for the economic mistreatment and emotional distress inflicted during the divorce proceedings." Victoria consulted her notes. "Third, we request that Mr. Whitmore be ordered to pay all of Mrs. Whitmore's legal fees and costs, which currently total approximately $850,000. Derek's attorney, Susan Mitchell, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Fourth, we request a restraining order preventing Mr. Whitmore from contacting Mrs. Whitmore except through counsel regarding Thomas's welfare." And finally, Your Honor, we formally request that this court refer Mr. Whitmore's conduct to the New York County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution for perjury, fraud, and tax evasion. Judge Stanton nodded slowly. Ms. Keating, those requests seem eminently reasonable given what has been presented to this court. Ms. Mitchell, does your client have any response? Susan Mitchell stood, her face pale. Your Honor, I've advised my client that contesting these requests would be inadvisable. He has no defense to the evidence presented. Very well. Judge Stanton picked up her gavel. Here is my ruling. First, I am granting full legal and physical custody of Thomas Whitmore to Catherine Whitmore, effective immediately. Derek Whitmore will be permitted supervised visitation of 4 hours per week until he completes a psychological evaluation and parenting course, at which time custody arrangements will be re-evaluated. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes streaming. Second, given the egregious fraud and misconduct demonstrated by Mr. Whitmore, I am awarding Mrs. Whitmore 80% of all marital assets, including all hidden accounts, all real property, and all business interests. The remaining 20% will go to Mr. Whitmore. Derek made a sound like a dying animal. Third, Mr. Whitmore will pay all legal fees and costs incurred by Mrs. Whitmore, totaling, as Ms. Keating stated, $850,000. Fourth, Mr. Whitmore is hereby ordered to have no contact with Mrs. Whitmore except through counsel. And fifth, she paused, her voice dropping to something cold and final. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Mr. Whitmore, you have committed multiple felonies in this courtroom. You have lied under oath, concealed assets, and defrauded both this court and your wife. I cannot impose criminal penalties. That is for another court to decide. But I can tell you that if I were a betting woman, I would wager you will be facing criminal charges within the month. She brought down the gavel. This matter is concluded. Mrs. Whitmore, you are free to go. Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you retain excellent criminal counsel because you are going to need it. The next 6 months were a study in consequences. Derek Whitmore, who had walked into court believing himself untouchable, discovered exactly how far one could fall. The district attorney's office did indeed file charges, 12 counts including perjury, fraud, and tax evasion. His trial became a media sensation, with reporters documenting every devastating detail of his systematic destruction. His business empire, built on a reputation for shrewd dealing, collapsed when his fraud became public. Partners withdrew, investors fled, banks called in loans. The man who had been worth over $200 million watched his net worth plummet as legal fees mounted, settlements were paid, and assets were liquidated to satisfy court orders. His girlfriend, Amber, left him 3 weeks after the divorce hearing, when it became clear he was no longer a wealthy benefactor, but a pariah facing prison time. His father, James Whitmore, wrote him one letter. It was brief. Derek, I loved you from the day you were born. I sacrificed years of my life building a business I hoped you would cherish. I thought I had raised you to be better than me, stronger, smarter, more successful. But I failed in the most important lesson, teaching you that character matters more than wealth. You broke something that cannot be fixed. You destroyed people who loved you, and you did it because you could. I hope prison gives you time to find the man you could have been. I will not be visiting. I will be spending my remaining years with my grandson, trying to undo the damage you've caused him. Goodbye. Derek never responded to the letter. There was nothing to say. His criminal trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge, a different judge, a stern man in his 60s who had built his career prosecuting white-collar crime, sentenced Derek to 7 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 5. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said during sentencing, "you used your intelligence and resources not to contribute to society, but to inflict calculated cruelty on a woman who trusted you. You corrupted the legal system and betrayed every ethical principle that should govern family life. This sentence is not about revenge, it is about justice and deterrence. Perhaps in prison, you will finally learn the lessons you should have learned decades ago: humility, empathy, and the basic human decency you so spectacularly failed to demonstrate." Derek was remanded into custody immediately. The last thing he saw as they led him from the courtroom was a newspaper in the gallery. The headline read, "Real estate mogul gets 7 years for divorce fraud." Below it was a photograph of Catherine Whitmore, smiling, her arm around her son. Catherine didn't attend Derek's sentencing. She had already moved on. The money from the divorce settlement, over $170 million after taxes and legal fees, could have consumed her. She could have disappeared into a life of luxury, bitter and hardened by what she had endured. Instead, she became something else entirely. Within 6 months of the divorce being finalized, Catherine had established the Catherine Whitmore Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal assistance and financial support to victims of economic mistreatment. She partnered with Victoria Keating's firm to create a pro bono legal clinic. She funded shelters. She created educational programs teaching financial literacy to women escaping harmful relationships. She bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, not ostentatious, but comfortable, where she lived with Thomas and her sister Jennifer. She filled it with books, warmth, and the sound of laughter that had been absent from her life for so long. Thomas flourished. With his mother's full attention and the support of an excellent therapist, the withdrawn, anxious boy began to heal. His grades improved. He made friends. He joined the school's debate team and discovered he had a gift for public speaking, a gift he would later use as a young man to advocate for children of divorce. He saw his father once a year during supervised visits that Derek was granted after completing his parenting courses. The visits were cordial but distant. Thomas was polite, but he had learned the difference between a father who shows up and a father who loves. Derek never quite understood that distinction, though he tried, in his limited way, to be better. James Whitmore lived to see his grandson graduate high school with honors. He passed away peacefully 2 days later, a small smile on his face, a photograph of Catherine and Thomas on his bedside table. In his will, he'd left everything to Thomas, with a provision that Catherine managed the inheritance until the boy turned 25. He left Derek nothing but a final note. "You had everything. You chose to destroy it. That is the tragedy of your life." Victoria Keating retired 5 years after the Whitmore case, but she never forgot it. In interviews, when asked about her most significant victories, she always mentioned Catherine. "We win cases all the time," she would say. "We save companies, protect assets, win judgments. But saving a person, truly saving someone from destruction and giving them back their life, that's rare. That's the practice of law at its finest. Catherine didn't need us to win. She needed us to level the playing field. Once it was level, she won on her own strength. That's not a legal victory, that's a human one. 15 years after that morning in Manhattan Family Court, Catherine Whitmore sat in a lecture hall at Columbia Law School, invited to speak to a class on family law and ethics. The students, eager and idealistic, asked her the question she had anticipated. How did you survive? How did you find the strength? What advice would you give to someone facing a similar situation? Catherine, now 56, her silver hair worn openly and proudly, her face lined with experiences both terrible and beautiful, smiled at them. "You want to know the secret?" she said softly. "There isn't one. There's no magic formula for surviving mistreatment or injustice. There's just the decision to keep breathing, to keep moving, to believe that you deserve better than the prison someone else has built around you." She paused, looking out at the young faces. When I sat in that courtroom, I had nothing. No money, no attorney, no power. My husband had spent 8 months systematically destroying every resource I had, every connection I possessed. He wanted me to surrender. He wanted me to accept his version of reality, that I was worthless, that I had contributed nothing, that I deserved nothing. Her voice strengthened. But I knew something he didn't. I knew that silence isn't the same as weakness. I knew that patience isn't the same as surrender. I spent those 8 months not just surviving. I spent them preparing. I reached out to the one person I thought might help, Derek's father. I documented everything I could. I preserved every threatening email, every cruel text message, every piece of evidence that showed who my husband truly was. She smiled slightly. And when Victoria Keating agreed to take my case, when James Whitmore agreed to testify against his own son, I learned the most important lesson of my life. You are never as alone as your abuser wants you to believe. Help exists. Allies exist. Justice, when served by people who care about truth more than power, exists. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you ever regret the way things went? Do you wish you'd just taken the settlement and moved on?" Catherine considered this carefully. "I regret that my son had to testify. I regret that he had to see his father's cruelty exposed so publicly. But do I regret fighting? Do I regret demanding justice instead of accepting crumbs? Never. Not for one moment." She leaned forward. "Because here's what I learned. When someone tries to erase you, when they try to reduce your worth to a dollar amount and convince the world you deserve nothing, fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about refusal. It's about saying, no, you don't get to rewrite my story. You don't get to define my value. You don't get to win just because you're cruel enough to try." The room was utterly silent. "The money didn't save me," Catherine said quietly. "The money just gave me resources. What saved me was remembering who I was before I let someone else's contempt become my identity. What saved me was deciding that my son deserved to see his mother stand up, speak up, and refuse to be erased." She stood, gathering her notes. "You're all going to be attorneys. Some of you will be very successful. You'll make a lot of money, represent powerful clients, win important cases. But I desperately hope, that some of you will remember that the law isn't just about protecting the powerful. It's about protecting the vulnerable. It's about giving voice to the silent. It's about ensuring that cruelty, no matter how wealthy or well-dressed, doesn't triumph over truth." She smiled at them, a genuine expression of warmth and hard-won peace. Victoria Keating told me something after the trial concluded. She said, "Catherine, people will remember this case as a legal victory. But the real victory was watching you remember your own worth. She was right. That's the victory that matters. Everything else, the money, the custody, the justice, that's just the evidence that truth still means something. The students applauded as she left, but Catherine barely heard it. She was thinking about Thomas, now 27, finishing his first year at medical school, engaged to a woman who loved him fiercely and treated him with respect. She was thinking about the foundation which had helped over 3,000 women escape economic mistreatment. She was thinking about the brownstone in Brooklyn, where tomorrow she would host dinner for 20 people, friends, colleagues, the family she had chosen and built. She was thinking about how she had been erased, silenced, dismissed, and underestimated, and how she had come back from that destruction to build something beautiful. Derek Whitmore was released from prison after serving 5 years and 3 months. He was 62 years old, his hair completely grey, his expensive suits replaced by prison-issue clothing, and then by the cheap outfit provided upon release. He had no company waiting for him, no empire to reclaim. His assets, beyond the 20% the court had allowed him to keep, were long gone, liquidated to pay legal fees and restitution. He worked, for a time, as a property manager for a small real estate company in New Jersey. The owner, a former competitor who remembered Derek from better days, had hired him out of pity. The pay was $48,000 a year. Derek lived in a studio apartment and took the bus to work. He was, by any measure, a broken man. 3 years after his release, he wrote to Catherine, a single letter, handwritten, brief. Catherine, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I destroyed. I understand what I threw away. I'm not asking for anything. Not money, not contact, not absolution. I just needed to tell you that you were right. About everything. I'm sorry. Derek. Catherine received the letter on a Tuesday morning. She read it once, slowly, then set it aside. She never responded. There was nothing to say. The man who had tried to erase her had erased himself. That was consequence enough. That was justice. She donated the letter to her foundation's archives, where it became part of an exhibit on the long-term effects of economic mistreatment on perpetrators. A small plaque beside it read, "Cruelty, in the end, consumes those who practice it." Catherine never thought about Derek after that. She had better things to do with her life. In the end, Catherine Whitmore's story was not about revenge. It was not even truly about justice, though justice had certainly been served. It was about something more fundamental, the refusal to be diminished. When someone wields power against you, when they use money, influence, or cruelty to make you smaller, to make you silent, to make you disappear, the greatest act of resistance is simply this: to remain, to stand when they expect you to kneel, to speak when they demand your silence, to fight when they assume you have surrendered. Silence, in the face of mistreatment, is not weakness. It is strategy. It is preparation. It is the gathering of strength before the storm. Judge Stanton gave Derek 7 years in prison. But here's my question. Was that enough? Too much? Or exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comment below what you think justice looks like. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel so you get notified when we post the next story.